Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. And in today's show, we should definitely have a decent, if not a very good time with the reading for today. Before I go any further, I just want to shout out those of you who have inquired about working with us to build this African-centered curriculum that will take our children even into the next century. I have one sister who came on board. She's an admin on the Discord, and if you want to be a participant, just ask me where to go and come on through and let's work. We're gonna restart ramping up our efforts very soon, almost immediately. Also, I put this out the other day. I would also like to have it could be male or female, but I found that females tend to be more thorough. I'd like to have a female, a Black woman or two to help with this podcast in particular. Form a small team, two Black women, form a small team and turn this podcast into a movement and not just a podcast. And it's appropriate that I put that out there this week on social media because, it's appropriate in consideration of what we're going to discuss here tonight, which is nation building and the African woman. Before I actually start the reading and commentary, I want you to support everything on KWAZ Radio, and you could begin here.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. And so, speaking of the pro-Black perspective, Oni Tase has that brainstorming going on where the idea is to create some sort of revolutionary pamphlet to get more people to join the organization that he's building over there, as well as to get in the right mindset. We're trying to do this thing for 2021. 2021 needs to be a year for African people of really getting together. Afrozer, the musician who you've seen in the chat room here on these live streams before, he had a post that I liked it a lot. The post was along the lines of, forget all the pleasantries and, getting to know one another and all that kind of stuff. Let's just get to work. And then afterwards, we can do all that kind of schmoozing, as those Jews call it, right? Let's get to work, okay? And that should be our mantra going forward. Let's get to work. Let's just get to work. Let's just get it done. So If you also join the Discord, you can actually listen to the show on Discord. I do believe I set it up right. Let me just ask. And see. For all intents and purposes, it seems like I'm all good on the Discord. So, today's reading, let's get to it. And by all means, if you're listening, give me a thumbs up. Let's get these thumbs up rolling. That's been a thing we've had to emphasize, all of us on KWAZ Radio, especially, that the thumbs up helps with the algorithm on YouTube. And that algorithm helps others to come across our videos and check out the podcast. Also, if you care about what you're hearing, you know, hit us a thumbs up. By all means, hit us a comment. You know, share the video on social media. Don't be shy. Don't be bashful. Just share. Just share to your people. Hey, I heard this show. I liked it. I think you might like it too. Right? Okay. So nation building on the African woman. You know, a few weeks ago, I did a show on, you know, Black nationalism and Black women. And one of the big messages I tried to get across in that episode was the idea that, you know, in our ancient African tradition, right, it was understood that the African woman was a genetic link, right, to the future generations, and to pass down and disseminate like conscious thinking. And so one of the things we want to do, and this was a conversation I had earlier with the sister who just joined in with me and working on this curriculum, we got to start seeing more collectives of, you know, a larger collective of sisters when this work is happening. When I attended the brainstorm that Onita Say from the Pro-Black Perspective is doing, there was a bunch of guys in there and there was one sister. And I just think that we need to start balancing those numbers a little bit more. We're not going to be able to build this nation if we don't have our women involved. We have a role to play, and our women have a role to play as well. And I think that this paper is going to kind of delve into those roles as well. It's definitely something that you know, we really got to work more towards in this new year coming up. Hopefully the world opens up again. You know, hopefully outside is open and we have the ability to actually build in person as well as online. I think the two are useful. Right? So let's do this work. So now to the reading. Nation building on the African woman begins with the chairman. This was like a presentation, an oral presentation, and I think it was transcribed. All right, this was a lecture that was transcribed. So the chairman of the conference or the meeting says that it is my great honor and privilege to be here this afternoon to introduce the very able woman who is going to speak to you. Dr. Obeng comes from Ghana. Her primary and secondary education were received at Achimota. Then she went to the University of Birmingham, where she took a degree in zoology. Dare I say that we seem to speak the same language, as my own degree was in zoology in South Africa? But she went much further than I. I did not have the tenacity and determination to go on, as she did, with this very interesting subject and take an MSc in parasitology, a master's in science in parasitology. She was not even satisfied with that, but went on to a PhD. She has been a lecturer at the University College of Science and Technology in Kumasi, and is now director of Research Institute of Aquatic Biology. In addition to all this, She's a mother of 3 children. I take off my hat to her. I know I am speaking to other people here who are distinguished in many fields, who have done so much for their countries, for society, and for their homes. I do not know how you have all managed to do it. So then the following lecture was delivered. Nations, writes Draper, like individuals, are born, proceed through a predestined growth, and die. One comes to its end at an early period, and in an untimely way, another not until it has gained maturity. One is cut off by feebleness in its infancy, another is destroyed by civil disease, another commits political suicide, another lingers on in old age. But for everyone, there is an orderly way of progress to its final term, whatever that term may be. Draper's conception of nations and individuals undergoing a predestined growth no longer commends itself to most modern historians, sociologists, and political scientists, but it is a fact of history that over the centuries, nations, kingdoms, and empires of varied kinds and forms have risen, blossomed, and withered to their final term. Africa also has nursed many nations, large and small. I think it is essential at this early stage to identify what I mean by the term nation in the context of the subject that I shall be discussing. After consulting a number of distinguished authors, I found that the terms race, people, and nation used in relation to groupings of mankind are often treated as if they are interchangeable. There seem to be no watertight definitions for them. A similar observation has also been made about the use of the terms territory and state, although in this case it appears that a state must have a permanently clear definition of its physical boundaries. For the purpose of this talk, I am following Emerson's interpretation of a nation. He writes, "The nation is a community of people who feel they belong together in the double sense that they share deeply significant elements of a common heritage and that they have a common destiny for the future. In the contemporary world, the nation is, for great portions of mankind, the community with which most men intensely and most unconditionally identify themselves, even to the extent of being prepared to lay down their lives for it, however deeply they may differ amongst themselves on another issue." The nation is essentially a political mechanism which drives the people towards achieving a common aspiration. The independent nations which have emerged from the post-colonial period of Africa have complex characteristics acquired through contact with the metropolitan powers, which are largely a result of the impact of science and its agencies, but they have the basic essentials needed and they qualify to be considered as nations under the definition I have outlined. Apart from the impact of science and technology and the adoption of certain political institutions, these new nations are not much different from those which existed before Africa had contact with Europe. Comparatively, little is known of nations of that time because much of African history, as recorded, dates from the period when Europe is believed to have opened up to Africa. Basil Davidson quotes Sir Reginald Coupland as having written in connection with British penetration into Zambezi Valley that up to the middle of the 19th century, the main body of Africans had no history but had stayed for untold centuries sunk in barbarism, so that the heart of Africa was scarcely beating. With this and similar views being rife, it is not surprising that accounts of the history of Africa before the arrival of Europeans are not easily available. Davidson and some other scholars of African history however, give a very interesting and instructive account of the period before European intrusion into Africa. This period has been designated prehistory. I shall not attempt to deal with nations in the prehistory period. I intend to limit myself to the present and the colonial past of Africa. Specifically, I shall examine the role of the African woman in nation building before colonial days, during the colonial period, as well as her present position and contribution to the process in post-colonial times. This omission of comment on the prehistory period is not because there was no prehistory or prehistory African nations. On the contrary, there were not only nations generally at some stage with kings, Dahomey, Ashanti, Benin, but also empires like Ghana, Songhai, and Mali. And that's the thing, you know, again, if you listen to these folks, right, you never did anything, right? And you want to get away from any kind of thinking along those ways. That's why you have to, if not do the reading yourself, listen to those who have done the readings, listen to those who continue to do the readings and the analysis, like those of us on KWAZ radio. These empires had complex central organizations with rulers. They traded and controlled trade and commanded definitive political power. The peoples of these nations and empires possess much national pride and a deep tradition of confidence and prestige. A Father KWAZ has been recorded to have written in 1687 about the Congolese nations that they think themselves with nauseating presumption the foremost men in the world, and nothing will persuade them to the contrary. That's a quote. They think their country is the largest, happiest, and most enjoyable and most beautiful there is. Notice how this white guy, probably an Italian or something, notice how he felt it was nauseating, right? The close association of a country or state as a physical entity with a nation is vital for establishing the identity of the nation. In pre-Europe Africa, the physical boundaries of countries were often indefinite and followed the vagaries and fortunes of war. This pattern, however, was not unique to Africa. It was common also outside of Africa. However, in Africa, the situation became even more confused after the period during which Europe was believed to have opened up the continent. There was a scramble for possession, and large areas of Africa were carved up arbitrarily and shared. The resulting countries were artificial and took no cognizance of ethnic relations, and that's the shame of what happened, like in the Berlin Conference and stuff, which we've talked about in recent episodes as well. In West Africa, for example, the northern regions of Ghana, Togo, Dahomey, and Ivory Coast, even now, have much more in common than they do with the southern sections of the countries of which they form part. However, stronger forces have forged and maintained the cohesion needed within these countries is now defined. The process of evolution of a nation imbues people with a jealously guarded pride. They recognize themselves as persons distinct from those of other nations. They produce identifying national emblems, national flags, and national anthems. In some cases, they even change the colonial name of the country and adopt a name from prehistory, where people have been previously oppressed or under foreign domination. The act of liberation begins its own exciting impetus. The recreated unity of the community is translated into activities culminating in attempts to get as far away as possible from the previous colonial status. However, these new nations, far from merely demonstrating an emotional turmoil with undirected, irrational activities, are organized as they were in prehistory. All persons then, irrespective of sex or age, were expected to contribute to the process of building the nation. However unsophisticated, in comparison with present-day complex requirements, national responsibilities were well defined. I'm not highlighting yet. Let me see if I can highlight. Okay. The responsibilities of the African woman to the community and her status in the social setup at the time have survived the centuries to throw light on the past. The significant facts which continues to emerge show that within the society, in certain parts of Africa, the status of the woman was defined. She had a distinct place in the community, enjoyed the privileges associated with it, and accepted the responsibilities which were peculiar to her. She participated in the building and sustenance of the community through duties assigned to her, and she rose to the expectation. Perhaps the exception was in Muslim-dominated areas of Africa, where there was a tradition of suppression on the basis of religion. This is why I don't mess with religion. Among the Lili of the Congo, for example, where raffia palm farming was a vital economic activity, the labor associated with its cultivation was clearly divided between the women and the men. And this kind of division of labor had a pragmatic purpose. It also carried with it the responsibilities for certain associated social activities and religious practices. In normal day-to-day life, the Lili woman, like other African women and perhaps other women all over the world, had care of home and children. In some countries, usually the African woman was the custodian of certain village crafts, which she practiced, perfected, and handed down to following generations. She had defined functions in birth, puberty, marriage, and funeral rites. She was associated with the preservation and perpetuation of important elements in national culture, like complicated dances, singing, folklore, drumming, and traditional costumes, which have become a distinctive importance of the new nations. There are also accounts of isolated cases of women in Africa undertaking assignments which were out of the ordinary. These were equally well performed, whether it was in support of a struggle against great odds to change unsuitable traditional customary practices, a rebellion against untenable social conventions repressive to women, the setting of new fashions in society, or the leadership of men in war. There was a determination of purpose. But perhaps the African woman's most significant status has been the importance attached to her in relation to the preservation of the purity of the lineage of the clan. In old empires of Ghana, Songhai, and Mali, as even among the Akans of Ghana now, inheritance was matrilineal. Inheritance was matrilineal. This form of inheritance is not uniform throughout Africa, but where it is the traditional pattern, the woman is accepted as the genetically significant link between successive generations. That's what I was talking about earlier, right? Life is believed to be dependent on the interaction of two factors, one from the father and the other from the mother. The father provided the offspring with the Netoro, or spirit, and the mother, the Magwa, or blood, which was passed from generation to generation through the female. You know, that reminds me, like, I remember a newborn child had jaundice. And the reason they said the child was jaundiced and stuff like that is because the child had the father's blood type, not the mother's. And so when I read stuff like this, that, that's what African people would say, right? So when I read stuff like this, it reminds me of that, the spirit comes from the father, but the blood. And so the idea was that, blood differences, in the child from the mother, like it's kind of like an incompatibility kind of thing. That's why there was like this jaundice problem in the beginning. In the chat room, I see LETITIAE from the pro-black perspective. Big ups to him. He says that in Toro is similar to nature. I heard someone say that's the actual pronunciation. Now I see why. Yeah, now we see why. All right? In Toro, the spirit. Mogwa is what I think it's a pronunciation, is the blood. And that's what passes from generation to generation through the female. Two sets of bonds are recognized, one patrilineal and the other matrilineal. In the practice of the latter, it is the offspring of a sister who succeed a man and not the man's own children, who may not have Mogwa similar to his own. That's interesting. The practice was the offspring of a sister who succeed a man. Huh. Interesting. Interesting, but it follows. It makes sense. If that's if what I read before is the basic principle that traditional Africans tended to operate, then it would make sense that your lineage will pass through your related sister's children. His Mogwa is the same as that of his sister's children. Persons who are bound by one Mogwa claim to share a common distant ancestry. This belief in the mother's Mogwa is as forming the link between the successive generation puts the woman in a very strong and unique position in society. And here's the thing about that, right? If we follow this understanding, then it stands to reason, like me and the sister were discussing earlier on Discord, it stands to reason that when you group more and more African women together, functioning together, holding each other up, keeping each other accountable, focusing on a certain task towards the building of the nation. When you put this quote unquote power of the individual together with others to make a collective, that's what we need a lot of too. And we need the same with the men as well. But we need to see more sisters really involved in nation and nation building, really involved in the discussion, the design, the thinking of nation building. A lot of times, I have to be honest, when I pay attention to what others might be doing, or maybe I might get involved in something, it's mostly men involved. It's mostly men involved, and we need more sisters today following some of the guidelines I'm hoping this paper will give us, right, going forward. Among the royalty, it was and still is the children of the sister of a chief who have claim to chieftaincy. The sister of the chief, who became the queen mother by virtue of this relationship, held a strong position in the community. In their own right, even now in Ghana, a number of women are queen mothers, and they exercise enormous powers directly or indirectly in their immediate society, and are consulted on decisions and commitments which affect their particular states in the nation. This is also kind of the reason why I like the idea of building teams with women. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. I have based these observations on the Ghana experience, but it is on record that in the past, importance was also attached to women in other parts of Africa for similar reasons. For example, though the interpretation of the Mendi of Sierra Leone with regard to the position held by the women in the lineage of the clan was somewhat different from that of the Akans of Ghana, the conception that continuity was through her was clear. The contribution of the mother to the child was considered particularly important, that of the father being treated as secondary. The love-do of the Transvaal did have an unusual reaction towards the general idea of creation, but they hailed their queens to be divine and to have control over nature. A queen was without blemish, physical or spiritual. In fact, she was considered so divine that she had to die of her own volition to show her supremacy over ordinary beings who through weakness normally succumb to the tests of nature and die. It is a fact of history that the importance attached to a woman in the clan and her part in the maintenance and perpetuation of a social and politically stable community gave her a decisive role to play in the evolution of the nation. I have on purpose dwelt on what I consider significance in relation to the African woman in terms of her contribution to nation building in the past. I have omitted some factors. Examples have been understandably limited to some sections of Africa. It is a large continent. Nations did exist in pre-Europe Africa. Many of them, especially south of the Sahara, later passed through a colonial phase. After a period of foreign domination, there came a wild flare-up of desire for self-assertion and the rebuilding of nations under modern conditions. They were to be built in modern times, whose distinctive features have been molded by science and technology, complexities of which have completely transformed the character of national development. It has been necessary to evolve new constitutional arrangements to cope with novel economic and social pressures created by the application of science and technology to nation building. It therefore required of the African woman new forms of involvement in activities which contribute to the ingredients of nation building in modern times. These include the firm establishment of processes for the wise utilization and management of national resources for improving the national economy, the development of an effective international machinery for trade, the creation of appropriate institutions aimed at achieving reasonable levels of education and health for all the people, the practice of political independence in a manner acceptable to the majority of the nation and reasonably compatible with internationally satisfactory practices, and the jealous preservation of cultural heritage, historical experiences, language, national identity, territorial integrity, and other characters which give a nation a definitive and distinctive stamp. The African woman, under these circumstances, requires competency and specified expertise for effective participation. Now, that is a mouthful, but it also highlights something too. Nation building is not something simple. And it's not something that comes about with ease. It also highlights that nation building requires education. And you've heard me pounding the soundboard here in that regard. At the end of the day, most of this stuff that we're talking about, if not all of it, starts with the education. You cannot have African women with their head in the bubble, not knowing nothing, right? Because their traditional role in nation building is so deep that without that knowledge, right, that gives them the expertise, right, that allows them to be effective participants, right? If we don't have that, we're done for. And so when we look at what's going on in society now, the reason why we have to put out a call to action to get more conscious women, black women, involved, you know, to join our platforms, etc., and to help us to do the work. Honestly, a part of it is because a lot of women, and the men too, make no mistake about it, have kind of made themselves so American and Europe centered that their head is in a bubble. They see what's going on because, you know, they have eyes to see, but they don't connect with the problem. And if you don't connect with the problem, you're not going to connect with the solution. They fully immerse themselves in the education and the thinking of how Europeans carry themselves. They don't see our problems. And so that in no way, shape, or form will they connect themselves to our solution. And so that's why I keep pushing this curriculum idea up, an updated curriculum that's expansive, that's immersed, you know, in problem solving and in our you know, original African tradition, that's immersed in the community, that's immersed in, you know, seeing each other as humans and seeing that the uplift of one you know, is the uplift of everyone. We're in this together, so to speak. And so this is why we need to really, this is why we really need to, even a little bit more so than the men, again, for the reasons I stated earlier and this paper highlights. Our women are the teachers of nations, right? And so we got to get our women together. We got to get our education together in order to get our women together. So again, I put it out there, help build an education that makes not only our men better, but makes our women better too. Makes them more effective, makes them more able to participate. Unfortunately, it appears to me that in spite of the African woman's active and effective participation in national activities of the past, under these modern conditions within which nations building is taking place, her contribution to the requirements I have outlined has been ineffectual, and therefore her response to the national need up to date has been rather inadequate. And that's a good point, right? Because of how, you know, African nations went about building nations. Again, I've talked about this in the last few episodes, where you just was working with the remnants of what the colonizers left behind. Again, if you follow what they do, you're following ruination. You're following your own destruction. Remember, we talked about this before, and I had Oni on the show some years back. And we talked about it then too, like, yo, the Europeans have historically hated their women. So when they proceed with their nation building, the women are not really included. So if you're African and you follow that example, right, then you're going to create a quote-unquote nation, right, that's ineffectual because you did not include one half of your being, right? You may have the spirit, but you don't have the blood running through that nation. To continue, I've tried to find the possible causes for this state of affairs. The most likely reason, it would seem to me, is that there has been a psychological setback for the African woman. It appears this is recent in origin. I am inclined to believe that the cause of the change may lie in the fact that in the provision of opportunities for formal education in early colonial times, a wide gap developed between men and women. You see how it comes back to the education. And at some point, you guys got to get it. You guys got to get that the education, especially those of us, outside of the continent, but even those of us in the continent, because of the effects of colonialism, the education is poor. The focus was on the males, not the females, so on. So the education for the females especially is poor. So when we see our women running around, doing all kind of cosmetic stuff to look like Europeans and stuff like that, now you kind of know why. You got to capture their minds. It's the education. It always comes down to the education. In earlier colonial days, the missionaries and administrators needed literate persons to solve in the capacities of catechists, technicians, and attendants. Women were considered hardly suitable for such duties. Look at that. The formal training, it was believed, was a luxury. Most men also needed wives and daughters for specific money-earning duties. They were part of the machinery for maintaining the family. The men believed that to send them to school would disrupt their economy. The girls, the men argued, could perform duties given them without the foreign man's strange ideas. In any case, the argument continued, it would be a luxury because the girls would only return, after all, to the kitchen. I have a brother from another mother who, and I know his mom too. They're from Trinidad. And his mother wanted to continue in school. And this is a common story, especially like in the Caribbean back in the day. Wanted to continue with school and go further than just a primary school education. And the father, I believe he was, if not a preacher, was a very religious man. And the father was like, nah, I need you here tending to the fields and stuff like that. Right. Good evening, the life of Nelly. Good to see you. Right. I need you tending to the chores around here. Cause I think his mom was asking for a pair of shoes to be able to go to school, and he was like, nah. Right. And we got a long ways to go. We need to better prepare our girls, our children, period, but our girls especially, for the road ahead. The girls, the men argued, could perform duties given them without the foreign man's strange ideas. And in any case, the argument continued, it would be a luxury because the girls will only return, after all, to the kitchen. We have to want more for our women. It was not until much later that this misconception began to die and opportunities were provided for the formal education of girls. Consequently, women lag behind insofar as the acquisition through modern formal education of the relevant know-how needed for aspects of modern nation building was concerned. The relevant know-how, and that's what the curriculum intends to address. Giving our children, male and female, the relative know-how needed for aspects of modern nation building. The biggest part of the nation, in terms of nation building, is really solving its people's problems. Right? You have a problem, we're a nation, together we're gonna fix the problem. I always use Flint as the example. If we had a nation here in America, and I think only to say put it brilliantly, we don't have a nation in America, we have a population in America. I think that's well stated. We have a population. We don't have our own government. Seeing about our needs and fixing helping to assist in fixing problems around us. This must have resulted in a subconscious feeling of inadequacy, which has gone a long way to affect the African woman's confidence. Confidence of ability to participate in certain activities. Hello to everyone who joined. Please don't post my name in the chat room. Thanks. Right? Of ability to participate in certain activities. In modern times, education is a prerequisite to nation building. The African woman's contribution now depends heavily on education at various levels and in diverse disciplines. The African woman of the past was satisfactorily equipped for her contribution to the society under conditions which existed then. But now, even a queen mother with all her sophistication cannot expect to participate effectively in policy-making decisions which depend on modern technological concepts and which may have repercussions beyond the confines of the nation. She cannot expect to fit into the present complex political apparatus. That's an interesting point. Like, there was a time where, you know, where things were, you could say, simpler, perhaps pre-European involvement, right? Where a woman could have had much simpler roles in the nation, right? But in this time, in this modern time, our women need to have, you know, much more complex roles in building this nation going forward. This setback for the African woman shows not only in this respect, but also in most of the aspects of nation building already mentioned. In trade, for instance, her contribution of internal trade in pre-Europe days had been active. Her contribution did not diminish during early colonial times, when trade was virtually the main preoccupation of the colonizers. The importance of trade in those days was almost supreme. Political domination in most cases was a secondary feature for ensuring good trade. That makes sense. In the Gold Coast, the Danes, Dutch, Portuguese, and other colonizers started their association with the country through trade. Political domination was considered when trade was endangered. A typical example is the political subjugation of Ashanti in 1874 as a result of the failure of the Ashanti king to produce 150,000 ounces of gold for foreign administration. He was finally sent into exile. The nation became a protectorate and trade flourished thereafter. So different times require different, you know, defined roles, right? And those roles need to change in their definition from time to time. This is why you always have to refine. You always have to go over what was done in the past and refine it and make it applicable to what's going on in the present and what's going to be needed in the future. Right? However, in the modern period, trade has, as would be expected, received a renewed impetus, both internally and in foreign markets. In Ghana, as in Nigeria, women traders have had and continue to have great sway over the direction of trade in certain sectors of the economy. The women traders of Ghana do not have university degrees, but they are nevertheless shrewd businesswomen. The Yoruba women of Nigeria have even gone further and extended their trading activities beyond international boundaries all over West Africa. Even so, the trade horizon has widened far beyond the scope of these competent women. Because of the complex nature of modern international trade, the effort is now inadequate. Relevant education, once again, relevant education is needed. So, you know, when you hear folks talking about like Africa, you'll hear the concept of Sankofa and stuff coming up, which is an important one. Right? It's important to go back and to bring certain concepts, even phrases, ideologies back into the present, but not without refining them, not without updating them to match the times, right? And so one of the things we want to do whenever we talk about Africans building a nation, building up the continent into a nation, we got to not ignore or forget what our ancestors did, before being occupied by Europeans. But we also have to take what they did and match it, right? In fact, update it, right? Because the past is history, and history is a part of education. So when you talking about history, you got to bring up the knowledge to match what's going on, not only today, but looking forward. In fact, it's important that you look forward to what's coming in the future. Onita says exactly, we have a population. Daily affirmations by Pauline, understanding the message, completely relevant today. Absolutely. Thank everyone who's in the chat room and everyone who's listening right now to this live stream. I appreciate it. So to continue, again, when we consider the African woman's contribution to the utilization and management of natural resources in which economic expansion has its roots, we find it rather narrow. Natural resources here defined include what human judgment considers useful and usable. I like that. The decision draws primarily on technical insight, but also requires natural wisdom and a keen foresight. Viewed in this way, natural resources do not become limited only to the conventionally accepted forms, but include a wide range of items. In the predominantly agricultural areas of Africa, farming had always in the past been taken as a serious economic proposition. Although in East Africa, the farming of cash crops was generally undertaken by foreign farmers, in other parts of Africa, like the Gold Coast, farming in colonial days was on a native peasant basis. Coconut, oil palm, maize, and other crops were cultivated. With the introduction in about 1890 of cocoa as a cash crop for the Gold Coast, its cultivation by peasant families, including women and girls, helped to boost the economy immensely. The women had an important role to play, particularly during harvesting and post-harvest preparation of the cocoa beans. From 1949 to 1951, the average annual export of cocoa was 253,509 tons. In 1953, the figure of 236,634 tons was recorded. The world consumption of cocoa for that year was between 750,000 and 780,000 tons. I wonder what it is now. I could look it up, but for someone in the chat room, if you want, look that up. What's the tonnage of cocoa produced or exported annually from the continent or from the Gold Coast? The overall average annual export value of cocoa during the period was about 56 million pounds. Present-day production is affected greatly by the ravages of cocoa diseases. In recent times, women have sought to contribute more effectively to nation building in this aspect of the use of natural resources, and although the results are not readily spectacular, the scope of their participation has gradually widened. In Kenya and Uganda, trained women have been effective agricultural instructresses for some time. In Ghana, as in other parts of the continent, Girls have taken to studying agriculture. See, this is what I like to hear. Have taken to studying agriculture at a university level. They also assist in forestry, game and wildlife management, and veterinary practices. Even among the less literate, competent women are now confidently side by side with men, running farming enterprises and businesses with poultry, sheep, and cattle. It is women also who organize, usually on an individual basis, the distribution of basic food materials throughout the country. Internationally, there have been substantial moves forward by women in agriculture. Let me just take a break here and do a little station ID as we are about halfway through the paper. I'll be right back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back this is the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We are continuing with our reading, where we discuss nation building and the African woman. In the chat room, I see Onita Say from the pro-black perspective quotes that in 2018, 2019, Ghana is estimated to have produced about 812,000 tons of cocoa beans. So look how the numbers have increased, right? And a decrease from approximately 969,000 tons in the 2 years prior, right? So when you have that kind of business going on, don't you think you need to have your women involved? Not just involved, but what's the word I'm trying to find? But educated, and along the lines of being able to run these businesses, and the what's the term it's called again? There's a term, the cottage industries that come from these main types of businesses, these main trades, right? Don't you think you need your women involved? Don't you think you need the young women? Like Africa right now, like the average age, I think Africa is pretty young right now, right? Like most people run around Africa are like 20 years old or something like that now. Don't you want those youth, male and female, to be able to carry on the building of the infrastructure in Africa? I just got a message on Facebook from Nelly. Love the podcast. Keep up the great and fantastic work. I appreciate that. That's my cousin Nelly who's saying that. I got a message from her mom as well. The topics are comforting and enlightening. I appreciate that as well. That's my aunt, Nelly's mom, and Pauline is saying that, so I appreciate that. So to continue with the paper, in the utilization of the sea and inland waters as a natural resource, the women have been active. The inshore fishing industry in Ghana, for example, is virtually under the control of shrewd businesswomen. The men may go to sea, but it is the women who maintain control over the preservation, distribution, and marketing of the fish, and in some instances, even finance the fishermen. But on the whole, up to now, the African woman's contribution to the management of natural resources has been small. For instance, she is only marginally involved in mining activities, and there are other fields in which she has no participation, The reason is simple. Utilization of natural resources under modern conditions is synonymous with scientific know-how. Bam. I love it when a point is made, right? In the scientific field, African women are comparatively few, but this present state of affairs is not totally discouraging. When the path of women's education is followed, it becomes obvious that the African woman is preparing herself to help in achieving a general level of education essential for nation building. Right? Let me read that again. When the path of women's education is followed, it becomes obvious that the African woman is preparing herself to help in achieving a general level of education essential for nation building. And I say we need more, we need a little bit more in this modern time for our women in terms of involvement in nation building. As Africans, we should actively seek out having our women represented equally to the men. The opportunities for the acquisition of relevant knowledge through formal education came relatively late to women in Africa, and as a result, left some fields open to men only. After an initial obvious hesitancy, recognition has now been given to the importance of women's education, and opportunities for formal education of women have become satisfactory. It has been a slow process with historical landmarks. The recommendations of the Advisory Committee on Education in the colonies in 1924 were noteworthy for the stress they placed on the importance of the education of women. That's something to read, if possible. The Gold Coast in 1929 took a bold and revolutionary step towards women's education by building Achimota College, a comprehensive boarding school established on the basis of providing equal opportunities in education for both boys and girls of all ages, from kindergarten to university, and maintaining and encouraging the retention of what is good in Gold Coast tradition and culture. That sounds like a model to be studied, right? You always want to study the past. Like I said, study the past, make your revisions for the present, and keep an eye on what you will need in the future. It took 4 years to complete and cost £617 from local revenue. That's the thing too. You see, this is something that we don't get as people, especially those of us out here in the Americas. If you want good education for your children, you got to put money behind it. The idea that someone's going to create curriculum, right? Constantly studying it, analyzing it, revising it, updating it, etc. And the idea that, you'll just sit back and when they build it, then your children should be able to benefit just automatically. That's a thinking that we have to kind of give up. Now, there is the case of doing the work to uplift the community. And, a lot of people don't have a problem with that, but you must also do work as well. And if if you can't do the work, then you should sponsor the work being done. Right now, Onitase has that brainstorm going on for the pamphlet, to kind of open up the consciousness of people in 2021 and going forward. And it's kind of crazy that mostly him, with the help of hopefully myself and others who pledge to help, is doing that work. And we're gonna put this thing out, collaborate and put this talking piece out to kind of open the minds of our people. And you're doing it strictly off of your own resources, right? Look at the example that's given here with Achimota College, right? They put their money up. They put their money up. And they put it up with the boys and the girls in mind. So the question becomes, and this was when, like in 1929, you know, we're just a few years shy of, you know, the centennial of this activity. And what are we doing now? What are we doing now? You know, what I'm talking about, you know, changing the education and changing the curriculum in particular for our boys and girls is not a new concept. Like I read some papers, you know, some weeks or maybe months ago now, from like what, you know, the work that Booker T did at the Tuskegee Institute. That was over 100 years ago as well, right? That's before this, actually, right? And it's not a new concept, but we're still talking about it now. You know, it's, yeah, anyway. It took 4 years to complete and cost £617,000 from local revenue. Achimota retains today a happy blend of the old and the new. There's nothing unreal about the display of culture in costume, dancing, and art, and yet students leave the college prepared to stand up equally well in anything Western or imported. Let me make sure I read that right. Yes, in anything Western or imported. The university colleges of Legon, Kumasi, and Cape Coast, which followed Achimota, have maintained the co-educational tradition. Colonial governments, therefore, continue to make bigger allocations for education. The Gold Coast embarked on an accelerated development plan for education in 1951. From 1953 through 54, there were 494,334 pupils in primary and middle schools. 150,108 were girls. So that's a little less. Well, you know, that's less than half, right? Of 8,602 secondary school students, 1,296 were girls. So clearly that number needs to come up, right? If it hasn't. 121 out of 906 students who obtained the Cambridge School Certificate were girls. In the 50s and since then, the number of women undertaking university courses increased, and by the 60s, quite a number had graduated. At the University of Ghana, between 1961 and 1971, the number of students enrolled was 16,520, 2,438 were women. Volta Hall, built for the women, has become too small, and there is a spillover of women students into one of the men's halls. In 1971 through 72, the number of women on roll is 334. The pattern of increased educational activity has been similar for the countries in British West Africa. Nigeria's 1951 10-year development plan, look that up too, has placed much emphasis on education. Sierra Leone and Gambia also made much progress. In East Africa, Uganda had over 9,000 boys and girls in secondary schools in 1955. And you got to understand, like, a lot of these years, I don't have the dates of emancipation or dates of independence in front of me right now. But a lot of these numbers we're talking about are pre-independence. or maybe just post-independence in Africa, right? The development plan also aimed particularly at producing female teachers. Go back and listen to the episode I did a little while back talking about the Afrocentric profile, the profile of an Afrocentric teacher, right? We need more people like that teaching our children. That goes hand in hand with an improved curricula. In Zanzibar, for instance, training was planned and geared to the demand for trained women teachers. Nigeria established 5 training schools for women in the north and even provided one for Muslims. The Gold Coast 6-year development plan, which came into force in 1951, included the recruitment of 1,800 new teachers each year. Girls were given a fair consideration in this program. Not only has the number of women in training increased, but girls have diversified their interests in the higher institutions of learning. In West Africa, adult and community education to raise the standard of literacy of the people has largely been in the hands of women. In recent times, some women have established vocational training centers for girls, and these fill a gap and answer the need for the training of a large number of girls who do not enter secondary school but can study technical subjects such as secretariatship and home economics. I mean, that makes sense. There's always a need for that. I don't want people to think I'm against, the need for that type of education as well. But there's also the heavy need for our women, if we're talking about building nations, right, to be able to carry out the technical work of nationhood. So for any young women, I know my cousin is listening, for any young women out there who are listening, think about what I'm saying here. Yeah, there's traditional roles, blah, 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 but there's a bigger need, right? There's a bigger need. We need both of our genders working on solutions for our problems, right? Try to meet their contribution to improvement in national health. A good proportion of girls has also taken to studying in the field of health. From the 30s, a number of nurses and midwifery training schools were established in West Africa. Now, a large number of trained midwives contribute highly to the lowering of infant mortality, and that's a big deal in our community, and reducing the incidence of death of the mother in childbirth. We still have a problem in medicine, right? Why is that doing that? We still have a problem in medicine where we have an alarming number of our women who are dying in childbirth, like during childbirth, or dying post-childbirth. We still have the incidences of infant mortality, right? And those are things that we need all hands on deck. If we're talking about building nations, you need people to fill a nation as well as to build it, right? We need to combat these problems too. The medical school in Ghana is still in its infancy, but there are women among the students. Female doctors are also being trained and produced in Nigeria and Uganda. I have again deliberately dwelt on this manpower aspect of resource development to illustrate the keenness of African women to acquire the needed training to fit them for contributing to national development. The keenness is also obvious in other fields. Women have taken advantage of training facilities to take graduate courses in the pure sciences, applied sciences, administration, economics, and law, and that's what we need. Women are increasingly found behind guns in the military, in the air as parachuters, behind the steering wheels of commercial vehicles, uniformed as the police, in managerial posts, as research scientists. I like to hear that. engineers, medical practitioners, artists, and designers, and with the bar and bench, meaning lawyers, right? Judges and lawyers. The numbers are still too low for making the desired impact, but the outlook is refreshingly encouraging. So again, with these, but when you talk about curriculum building, and one aspect of that is to drive young minds into the areas that you need brilliant minds the most. The idea in some African countries, I can tell you, was always that at a certain age, I think it's maybe junior, what we will call junior secondary, I think it's at that age, you kind of get into the field that you have interest in. So if you're interested in medicine, you get into that field then, and everything you do is geared towards you becoming, a doctor or a scientist or what have you. And I think that's what we need when we talk about curriculum building. That's what we kind of need. We need it to be in such a way where there's the general education, of course, but there's also the mechanisms of kind of shifting people into certain gears, into certain avenues, certain lanes, right? To fill the needs that we would have when you're talking about building a new power or building a new nation that is Africa. Only time I say in the chat room is saying that, yeah, he's agreeing that infant mortality is still big for us. Yeah, it's very big for us. There's a number of contributing factors. Maybe I might do a show on that too, right? There's a number of contributing factors, but believe it or not, education is a chief factor in infant mortality. In the political field, the pattern of the African woman's participation is rather checkered. The potential in leadership is not lacking. Within recent times, the activities of Alice Lachina of Zambia, although of some controversial significance, could perhaps be cited as an example. However, in democratic elections to produce national policy-making bodies, the African woman has not made an impact. In the chat room, for anyone in the chat room, anyone who's listening, who are some of the black women, right, by name, that we should really be looking out for the work that they're doing on the continent? We tend to be so centered on, like, in America and stuff like that. If you say Stacey Abrams, most people will know who that is. But like, who on the continent, in which country or countries can we kind of like amplify the names of women who are in the political field and contributing to, developing nations, right, on the continent? So again, however, in democratic elections to produce national policy-making bodies, the African woman has not made an impact. She has lagged behind the Golda Meirs and Indira Gandhis of other countries, perhaps largely. Well, I haven't heard the name Golda Meir since maybe '92 or something like that. Perhaps largely out of lack of confidence to compete on the political platform against men. I should also say, in fairness to her, that it would seem that the previous temporary setbacks suffered as a result of feeling of inadequacy has been wittingly or unwittingly exploited by men to their advantage. That's very true. But at the pace at which the women are moving, it will not be long before they make their influence felt in this field also. And that's the thing, I think I talked about this in the past, that the confidence building that we need is so important. You're not going to get that in the education nor in the nation where you're just a population, right? You're just a group of people. If you understand that, say, America, for example, is a European nation and it's for European people, right? You'll understand that there's no way they're going to give you the education to raise your collective self-esteem. There's no way they're going to give you the education to be a power base within their country. So where's the education going to come from that's going to provide you with, really our children, with the self-esteem, right, that will give them the idea to work towards power or to work towards building a nation, right? You see, you have to consider these things. There was a meme I posted on Facebook recently, talked about, how'd it go again? RIP to all of the opportunities missed because of being shy or something like that. And so, like, you got to understand, when you're in a different people's nation, if you don't have that self-esteem to stand tall, right? You don't have the education that has given you that self-esteem to stand tall as an African in a country where Africans were enslaved, right? Brutalized through Jim Crow and still being brutalized today. If you don't have that education that makes you essentially swell up your chest and stand up and take opportunities that are out there, albeit they might not be for you, but through your boldness, right? You can stand up and address the people who have these opportunities and take these opportunities. You're going to be a lost group of people. You will truly just be a population within a nation, right? To continue. But if you work to build up an Africa, it's what I've been saying all along. You have a strong Africa, you have a strong African. And so with a strong African behind you, you won't have, these esteem issues, if you get what I'm saying, right? A lot of the esteem issues comes from the fact that in school, you're sitting down there with your mixed group of classmates, and they're talking about your ancestors being enslaved, being raped, being beaten, being murdered. How are you supposed to feel empowered when you have to go through years of that in, say, like the public school system? And even if our students, like I always say, because there's circumstances, even if your children have to go through like the public school system, right, for reasons that you can't prevent, or for reasons, that we have as a people haven't solved, right, for our own people. Like, you at home can still give an education to your children that improves their outlook on themselves, their esteem. To continue, taking an overall view, it is an odd and puzzling situation that, in spite of the general lamentation over the lack of manpower in Africa, even trained women who are now available are still not fully utilized by the nations. There are also retired but experienced women who can still be gainfully employed in some fields of the national endeavor but are ignored. Membership of certain public boards does not require specific academic qualifications. Some of these women qualify to serve on them. In Ghana, it is to the credit of the women that within a comparatively short period of time, some have studied and acquired internationally recognized and accepted qualifications and gained experience in various fields. I have found it interesting to check in terms of participation in aspects of nation building, how these women are placed in the local society and the ways in which they are being used at the higher levels of public life. In the legislature, there are 140 members. Only one is a woman. You see, that is the nonsense right there. In the judiciary of 79 judges of the Supreme Court, Appeal Court, Higher Court, Circuit Court, and magistrates, only 8 women. At institutes of higher education and research, there are only 2 women of professional grade. The boards of public corporations have predominantly male membership. Needless to say, their heads are also all males. In spite of the significant part played by women in trade, they are not even represented on the Chamber of Commerce. If I read this to you and you didn't know I was reading about Africa, who would you think I was reading about? What nation or what country or countries would you think I was reading about if I hadn't, explicitly stated that this is about nation building and African women? And I bet you your answer will be all you need to know about the problem that we face. And the churches are only now hesitantly giving recognition to women as members of the clergy. Could this be due to discrimination based on fear? Did not Socrates say, she's quoting Socrates now. Socrates. Did not Socrates say, women once made equal to men becometh his superior? I have considered this question from many angles. I do not think discrimination can be the scapegoat, because where women do exceptionally well, there is no hesitancy in giving them recognition. In fact, the opposite can be embarrassingly the case. And in any case, international opinion should make such deliberate discrimination, however subtle, difficult. The inclusion of the United Nations Charter at the San Francisco Conference in 1945 of certain provisions went a long way to promote the status of women. In the preamble, member nations reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in equal rights of men and women. If you haven't already, go back and listen to my last episode where I talked about human rights from an African perspective. The adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the General Assembly in 1948 was also effective in eliciting the correction of some misconceptions about the status of women. Together with the relevant articles in the 1945 Charter of the United States, the Declaration of Human Rights gave women an entitlement to civic, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Most constitutions in the new nations of Africa make similar provisions. Ghana's constitution of the Second Republic affirms that every person in Ghana shall be entitled to the fundamental rights and freedom of the individual, whatever his place of origin, creed, or sex. Ghana also signed the UN Convention on the Political Rights of Women in 1965. The convention guarantees women the right to vote, stand for elections, the right to hold public office, and to exercise public functions on an equal basis with men. These documents gave a legal recognition of the equality of women with men, but unfortunately, they have not wiped out the problem of subtle discrimination against women. So that's the thing. You could write anything on paper, is what you practice, right? I am inclined to think that maybe the problem of not putting women on boards or appointing them to high offices in public life could probably just be due to the fact that such a thing has been so rare for so long that when the need arises, the thought does not even enter the minds of the decision makers, except, of course, where the contribution of certain women is glaringly indispensable. You know, I've had this thought before too, that, for example, like in the case of Africa, right? we've talked about following what the colonizers did. And I think we've been under that. I think we've been under colonialism so long that a lot of our thinking is just Eurocentric in nature. I think a lot of what we do is just so Eurocentric, we don't even think about it. And I'm not using that as a what's the word? As an excuse. In fact, how I want to use that is to say that that's where the education needs to change. Right? You have an education that's centered on who we were as original, traditional African folks. We will avoid some of this problem. In fact, we'll avoid most of these problems. The men have for so long come to think of women as playing a particular limited role during the period that they have been widening their own horizon, that maybe, to some, any attempt by a woman to go beyond the accepted limits could be irritatingly presumptuous. Could this be a general, deep-seated male attitude? Goldsmith did write that women are confined within the narrow limits of domestic assiduity, and when they stray beyond them, they move beyond their sphere, and consequently without grace. They move beyond their sphere and consequently without grace. Again, did Rousseau not write that women's dignity lies in their being unknown? God damn, Rousseau. I never heard that from Rousseau before. Okay. Her glory in the esteem of her husband, and her pleasure in the welfare of her family. My own observation. Well, let me take a sip of water here. That was a heavy one there. My own observation is that this attitude, by and large, is now rather limited. I am inclined to hold on to my earlier reason as a possible answer to this attitude of not using women fully in public affairs, although the indifference could also in some instances be due to jealousies on a personal basis. There is that too. Is there any way in which the African woman can add to her present contribution to national affairs? I believe there is. I also hold the view that the woman has to take the initiative. Boom. I'm also convinced that she must earn any place to which she aspires and not have it conferred to her on the basis of her sex. Boom again. I also firmly believe from experience in the demonstrated as well as inherent competence of the African woman when she is entrusted with a responsibility for which she has been prepared. And that's why I always say I like this thing is messing up. I like building with women. If I have a project or something I'm working on, I tend to like women to be heavily involved. Are these women who are, who are knowledgeable and prepared in whatever the endeavor is, right? And by the way, if a guy is not educated and prepared for the work, I don't want them around me at all, right? She tempers the strict regime behind efficiency with the tenderness of motherly understanding, setting her priorities accordingly to honor first her responsibility. With increasing growth of self-confidence in her intellectual and technical competence, the deliberate destruction of any sense of self-insufficiency, the recognition of her areas of weakness, and the riddance of sloppiness of thought and action from her system, she will be prepared for asserting herself to achieve what she aspires to. It is true that in the traditional African view, the woman owes it almost as a duty to procreate, but happily, conditions are such that today it is usually possible to practice a happy blend of this other responsibility with the national ones. This paragraph was a good paragraph. I wish this thing was working properly. Yeah, okay, maybe it's working here. Okay, maybe not. The crucial requirement, as I see it, is that any effort to expand the scope of the African woman's contribution to the nation has to be primarily on an individual basis. Individual concern can develop into mutual exchange of views and even later stimulate organized discussion within the community. Fathers, husbands, and brothers should also encourage and help create conditions conducive to an even more effective participation of women in matters of national concern. They should appreciate and draw on the native wit, wisdom, and insight, as well as on the intellectual and technical competence of women when taking policy decisions. They should make use of her thoroughness of action. Remember I talked about? Anytime I work with women on a project, provided that they're familiar with the, with the topic at hand or what have you, or the work required, right? I always find women to just be more thorough. I'll give an example. Like I was involved in something not too long ago, and it was a bunch of guys and there was a woman involved. And, folks was talking about doing the work or whatever. And in the middle of work, there's a man cupcaking with the female in the group. And it's like, that's all you need to know about men. Like, and I've seen it even like with organizations and certain organization meetings and stuff of that nature. As a man, you go there and you see women, you find a woman attractive and whatnot, you'll have your eye on them. But look at the women. In my experience, the women are straight to the point. They are about the work. If you go to a rally and you trying to cupcake, they're like, brother, we going down this street here, we making the second left, we coming around, another left, and we'll encircle this area here. All right, sweetheart, but maybe, brother, grab a flyer, hand it out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like they are like tunnel vision in my experience. And if you have a different experience, I'd like to hear from you. In my experience, when you talk about like organized activity and organizations and stuff like that, women tend to be thorough, right? Men still tend to be men. Not to say men aren't thorough, but men, if a man sees what he likes, he sees what he likes, right? He's still a man at the end of the day. To continue, the African woman is like any other woman. At heart, she cares. She loves. She loves her home. Homes make towns. Towns merge into a country or state. A state is the physical counterpart of the nation. The good progress of the nation is the concern of any conscientious woman. She has to care, and she does care, because it is into this national environment that she will put her offspring. She is in present times contributing to nation building, but she would want to be more intimately and widely involved in the process. National progress should not be regarded as an accident. It is a necessity. I like that. National progress should not be regarded as an accident. It is a necessity. When something is a necessity, you need to work towards it. It requires a clear definition of purpose, a conviction of purpose, and a determination to implement that purpose. Women, as a rule, have an inherent potential to define an aim, aspire towards attaining it, plan for it, achieve it, and maintain it. Women could be the repositories of the ingredients for nation building, national progress, and the maintenance of national stability. The African woman is no exception. That's well done. That's really well done. That's the end of the paper. Let me see what the rest. Is that the end of the paper? Yes. There's a further discussion. Let me see. Let me just scan it real quick and see if in the comment section, yeah, only to say he knows about the cupcaking that we witnessed in the middle of a serious talk. Renee Moore, the sister who's just recently joined the Discord, says, I believe our Kemetic ancestors would say that we should rise above our animal instincts. Which is true. Further, yeah, that's true. Hold on, Facebook. You are speaking a message Africans need to hear so that they can educate their children. And to be clear, thank you, by the way, that's a comment I got on Facebook. To be clear, when I say African, and hopefully when you guys say African, you're referring to all of us in and out of the continent, right? That's the thing we need to really hammer down, that we're African. We've seen these different movements lately that are disconnecting Africans from the continent, and those things need to be shut down. We need to understand who we are, that we are in fact Africans in the diaspora, right? Let me see if there's anything in this discussion piece. Is this a question and answer period? So the chairman says, a year or two ago, I was asked to give a talk on the place of women in African society. I said, what do I know about African women? I could say something about Botswana women, but you don't really expect me to be able to talk with authority about women in Africa, in all Africa. Africa is a huge continent. You know, now I know it can be done. So I guess this is after the speech discussion. Mr. R.G. Ferguson, School of Oriental and African Studies, the University of London, says, may I offer my congratulations to our speaker for a most interesting and enjoyable lecture, even if I did not agree with all the points she made, being a man. Here comes the asshole man now, right? Here comes this guy. I do, however, support most strongly what Dr. Obeng said about attitudes to African history in pre-colonial times. I am on the staff of the extramural studies section of the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London. That kind of tells you already where this guy is at. I'm not sure if he's African or not, but that tells you a lot. We have several projects in hand, including an authoritative study of demanding people of West Africa, which we are hoping to bring to fruition in an international conference in the summer. We are also working on history syllabuses for use in higher education, which again include a strong emphasis on pre-colonial Africa and the production of educational materials concerned with Africa and the Orient. I was interested to hear more than one reference to the Gold Coast and British West Africa in the lecture, and I should be interested to hear what the current attitude is in Ghana to the colonial period. The lecturer says, Dr. Obeng says, if you had asked that question 15 years or so ago, my answer would have been clear-cut. Now it is more difficult. I shall dodge it by saying that people are thinking more of Ghana than of the Gold Coast. We are preoccupied with the present. Preoccupied with the present. That's a widely African problem, isn't it? Aren't we preoccupied still with the present? You know, I saw, what's this guy's name on Twitter? said Brother Hassan or something like that. I saw him in a video clip today talking about we focus on the past too much. That's not our problem. We focus on the present too much without consulting the past. That's our problem. Dr. Gareth Howell, Science Department, the British Council. Perhaps the answer to some of the problems aired in the lecture lies not in the education of women, but in the education of men. Would Dr. Obeng like to say something about the progress of co-education in African schools? My own experience in West Africa leads me to believe that it still has a long way to go. Dr. Obeng, the lecturer, says, as regards your first comment, I am glad you made it. I did not dare to, seeing that there are a lot of men here. On co-education, as I said, it wasn't very easy at the beginning when Achimota was built, but as the chairman observed, Africa is a big place, and it is rather unfair to generalize. I base what I'm saying on Ghana. Co-education had a rough time at the beginning, but I think now it is taken for granted in Ghana. I know of a girls' boarding school run by nuns, which takes boys to fill positions which are free during the year. That may show the extent to which people are prepared to go at this time. There are quite a number of boarding and day schools of the co-educational type. Studying with boys from an early age gives one or more settled outlook on life. Gives one a more settled outlook on life, I think. I butchered that just now. Mrs. G.E. Mercer, she asks, does the speaker think there is an adequate provision for educating the girls who might go on to technical education? Are there vacancies which cannot be filled because of lack of primary education or lack of initiative? Dr. Obeng answers, I don't think they lack initiative. In fact, I can say that the girls in secondary schools don't think O-level as the end of their education. For those who don't know, in the British education system, there's the GCE exam. You still see it in some parts of the Caribbean as well. In fact, I took a GCE as well. And the GCE, there's the ordinary or the O-level group. I think O is for ordinary group. And there's also the A-level group, which is kind of like a associate's degree level of learning, right? Automatically, they think of university. As far as opportunities for their training go, there are technical schools and higher institutions. Admittedly, we could do with some more, but I don't think that is discouraging anybody. In any case, we can always send students, male or female, to any part of Africa or outside Africa for training. The opportunities are there and the initiative is there. And I think it is just a matter of time. The attitude too has changed. Whereas in the past, older people would not think of an educated girl as being useful or necessary. Now they don't, on the whole, discriminate between sending girls to school and sending boys to school. But that's good to hear. All right. Mrs. Mercer asks, 40 years ago when I first went into bush villages, Mrs. Mercer already sounds like a European, but 40 years ago when I first went into bush villages, the school children were brought up to sing God Save the King. The first question I used to ask the chief was, why aren't there any girls in your school? But by the time we were leaving West Africa, it was marvelous to see the part the girls were playing. So that's a statement or a question. The lecturer answers, there was a period when there was immense activity in the villages in adult education for those who were long past the age of school going. Fathers and mothers were learning at least to be able to read and write. So as I said, the desire for formal education or for becoming literate is present not only in the children, but also in the grown-ups. So, I mean, essentially they're talking about like a colonial education, right? Like English or French education. Not that the parents, the fathers and mothers, weren't educated as far as the African society goes, right? Sir Selwyn Clark, KBE, CMG, blah, 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 says, I would suggest that Dr. Obeng should not be too despondent. If you take as a baseline in this country Magna Carta in 1215, then the emancipation of women with votes equal to those of men here did not take place for over 700 years to 1929. And it wasn't until some years later that Lady Astor became the first woman member of the House of Commons. I served in Ghana for many years and was always told that in many areas there was matrilineal descent. Dr. Obeng has reminded us of the law of inheritance in the case of chiefs. It wasn't the chief's son who succeeded, but the son of the chief's sister. Again, I used to be told that most of the money in the big centers of population was controlled by the market women. We have a saying in this country that the hand which rocks the cradle rules the world. I suggest that that might also apply in Ghana. Ms. Vera Harley, MBE International, YWCA. I know East Africa well. I wonder whether in East Africa, if a family can't afford to send all the children to school, they send still the boys only, because very often families cannot afford even primary education. That's actually a good question / statement. Dr. Obeng says, in Ghana, this may have been the case some time ago, but it is changing. There was a period when primary education was free. It was not compulsory, but free. And we had almost all the children going to school, sometimes even without a classroom. They sat under trees and learned the ABCs. I don't think the discrimination between boys and girls is there now. Miss Ann Cheatham says, I wonder if Dr. Obeng could tell us whether Western African countries have the same problems I found in East Africa of too many children, boys and girls, leaving school with the wrong kind of education and chasing too many jobs of the wrong kind, unfitted either to go back to their homes and follow a pastoral life or for jobs in the towns because of the lack of jobs. The problem will increase with mechanization. For instance, a shoe factory has been set up which could supply shoes to the whole of Uganda in 1 month. And yet there were some 12,000 young people coming out of school in one town, Kampala, with no jobs. So this must be an increasing pattern in West Africa, if it is not one already. Dr. Obeng replies, this is an urbanization problem faced by many countries, but increasingly so in Africa. The urbanization problem in Africa. In Ghana, some people are naturally attracted by the bright lights and want to move to towns instead of staying in the village. The result is that there is not enough work for all. I don't think an increase in those getting formal education would aggravate the problem, because there are also people who have not had any education at all moving from the villages to towns. The problem is not caused by the literate alone. In any case, by the time they move, the literate are not really qualified to do anything advanced in the towns. Instead of concentrating every job that is available in one big town, the ideal may be to spread out the jobs and factories in the countryside, encourage agriculture, get the school leavers interested in agriculture, and help them in the countryside where they are needed. And that's, again, that's what, when you're talking about nation building, you have to be thinking like holistically, right? You have to be thinking about, you know, there's this thing that a lot of us have been talking about lately, how men are led by their bellies, right? And so you gotta create jobs where the people are. And that's the thing, like, European society doesn't do. They create jobs in these city centers and stuff, and you leave the pastoralists leave the farms, and have to now go and adapt to a city life just for a job, just to be able to feed their bellies and the bellies of family. But what you want to do as an African people, you want to be able to job create, wherever the people are. So that if the people are in a place where farming is their way of life, is their way of doing things, well, there's a job attached to their farming. And so the work being done on the farms will help feed others elsewhere, and the work being done elsewhere will help to feed, will give back to the farmers. Right? This is a part of the whole idea of thinking about everyone and uplifting everyone for the whole thing to work. Right? That communalism type thing. If you're practicing communalism, you won't put all the jobs in a city. Jobs will be dispersed throughout the community. Whether we like it or not, Ghana is still an agricultural country. We cannot hope to compete with the outside world in producing manufactured goods for some time. Right? Mr. G.E. Mercer, the secretary, speaking from 26 years' experience of what perhaps I should call the dark colonial days in Africa, may I first offer a comment? In Sierra Leone, amongst the Mendes, to whom Dr. Obeng referred, it was quite normal to have women chiefs. I know one chiefdom where they insisted always on the election of a woman as chief. My second part is that having been concerned personally with the preparation of development plans for Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and the Gold Coast, and having been stimulated by the fact that my wife was herself an educationist, I did find that particularly among the Muslims, it was difficult to arouse enthusiasm. There tended to be a flat prohibition against education of girls. I wonder how far that situation has changed today. The lecturer, Dr. Obeng, says, I mentioned earlier that after Africa was divided up, the countries which came into being did not form homogeneous countries. So that, to take Ghana for instance, in what we used to call the northern territories that people were predominantly Muslims, the South was not. We know that the Muslim religion requires a woman to behave in a certain way, which does not allow her to do the things which non-Muslim women can do. Muslim women have to be veiled. They learn and study in a different way. So right from the beginning, they have this handicap, which may be reflected as lack of enthusiasm. So what you say is quite true. When educational opportunities were provided, women took advantage of them except in the areas where the Muslims predominate. There, if you tried to introduce a school where the girls had to be without veils, there would be a poor response. But things are changing. Now there are Muslim schools, and Muslim girls are even attending the normal schools in Tamale in the north. There is a teacher training college which has predominantly Muslim girls. Apart from a few grown-ups, I don't think I have seen many women, even up in the north, who are veiled. So if during the period when you were so kindly helping us to become educated, goddamn, you found you did not get the right response from the Muslim areas, don't hold it against the women, because they were just responding to tradition. I am quite optimistic about the way things are going. It won't be long before the women start making their influence felt in fields which probably would not be appreciated by the uneducated men. Mr. Casely M.O. Mate, or Mate, I am a private student. I know that in Ghana, usually boys and girls are educated together in the 6 years primary section of the educational system. I should like to know from the lecturer why there is a parting of the ways between boys and girls normally after this stage in the elementary school course. Secondly, I understand that in Ghana there is equal pay for men and women of equal qualifications. How has this mark of higher civilization been achieved in Ghana? The lecturer responds, the answer is the first one. I think it's historical. The colonizers were interested in trade. It was the missionaries who brought us formal education. In those days, boys were educated under a separate roof from the girls. So we will have schools beyond the primary level, which have been for a long time, mainly for boys or mainly for girls. The government schools, which came into being following the missionaries' effort, were mixed. I attended one of them, so I know. But even the government also had schools beyond the primary level, which were either for girls or for boys. This pattern was lived on, so now after the children have left the primary school where they have been together, they have to go to the schools which are available. If there are vacancies for girls only in girls' schools, then they have to go to girls' schools. If there are mixed schools which can take them, the mixed schools take them. It is as simple as that. You ask about equal pay. Whenever people talk about women's lib to me, I usually tell them that in Ghana, women were liberated a long time ago. I don't think there has ever been any discrimination so far as pay is concerned where people are properly qualified. Interesting. The chairman, in 1970, there was a BBC Two film called The Family of Man, which emphasized as its central theme the oneness of humanity. The question of the role of women in society should not worry us. On the whole, it is the same everywhere. For some time, it has been a man's world, but things change, and a lot depends on the women themselves. Listening to Dr. Obeng, I realized that a lot of what I thought only happened in Botswana happens in Ghana and elsewhere too. And I know some of it happens also in this country. In fact, when you look at things more closely, you find in spite of Africa being so young and developing, or perhaps because of that, we are free from some of the prejudices against women which exist in the developed countries. We cannot afford to waste talent, and this is a statement right here. As African people, we just can't afford to waste talent. That's it. That's just the gist of it right there. We just cannot afford to waste talent. We cannot afford to waste talent, and we are desperately short of manpower. So we tend to use whatever we have, regardless of sex, whereas the developed countries still pick and choose and discriminate against women. I attended an annual dinner where out of about 500 guests, there were only 2 women, including myself. The other woman said to me, I'm so glad you were able to come because, but for you, I would not have been invited, although I have been a director of this particular company for 3 years. Because you, as High Commissioner, had to be invited, they said, well, we might as well invite her. Dr. Obeng is not only a research scientist, lecturer, and mother, she's also an anthropologist and a historian. She has given us much food for thought. And I am so glad to have been associated with this Caroline Haslett lecture. I know what the trust does for the cause of women's education in the sciences, and I think this one important way of making sure that women take a rightful place in developing the nation. Whatever the nation, I think this is one important way of making sure that women take a rightful place in developing the nation, whatever the nation. On your behalf and on my own, I want to say how very much we have appreciated Dr. Obeng's lecture. And that is the end of the paper. What did you guys, who are still here in the comment section, look like I even gained more listeners. What's your take on this paper? What's the part or parts of the paper that you think is useful or most useful for us in this present day? I'll wait to see if anyone comments. And just so you know, this lecture was done in 1972, which I appreciate the fact that it's some years old now, right? So that it allows you to see what was going on at the time, even before some of us were born or born into consciousness at least, right? So the question is, what parts do you think are useful from this paper? And if you're not live with us in the chat room and you're listening to the playback, by all means, post it in the comment section. You know, which parts you think are useful for today, which parts are necessary as we go forward in the education of our children, particularly our girls, right? And what should we do with the women, like the adults that we have, adult women that we have around now? Like, what should be the course of action to be more inclusive, to give, to have them acquire the necessary tools, if they haven't already, for nation building? I'll give it a second to see if anyone comes through. If not, we'll end it there. In the meantime, while I wait, let me just stop, take a sip of water, and play these spots from KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. And, after playing that spot, it reminds me to remind you guys, if you haven't tuned in already, the Harsh Reality Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Recently had myself and LETITIAE from the pro-black perspective on their recent episode. I think it's episode 15. The Harsh Reality Podcast, as is everyone else on KWAZ Radio. We're all on YouTube, so just go on YouTube, search, and look up the Harsh Reality Podcast. When you find the channel, make sure to subscribe and check out their content, particularly the most recent episode, which was a fun episode to record with all of us together. Harsh Reality Podcast, the Queen's Council Podcast, myself and LETITIAE. I got a comment in the chat room from LETITIAE, speaking of. It says, it's good to see that female discrimination isn't developed. It's good to counter that moving forward. Also, I thought Islam discussion was what we'd expect. Yeah, I kind of expected the Islam discussion to go that way. Again, that's why I don't really mess with religion. Renee Moore says, if we are practicing Ma'at, there will always be balance, ensuring that women are involved in all aspects of African government, business, and culture should be intentional, not an accident. And that is a great message from the sister Renee. Yeah, absolutely. I thought that text stood out in this writing, and there's a few other things that stood out as well. But the idea that we, or a lot of the masses tend to think, a lot of the African masses tend to think that nationhood or nation building just occurs, right? Like you just fall your way or half-ass your way into a nation. It's just ridiculous at this point. You have to it's like you don't just half-ass your way into a house. You either got to build a house or purchase it after someone else built it. It takes work, is what I'm getting at. And so, once we start to understand the equality and the necessity of having both our men and our women involved in the work. And once we understand that for them to be involved in the work, they have to have the right preparation, the right education to do said work, we will be all right. The problem is we don't have that already done, unfortunately. And so we today still have to do the work, unfortunately. Even though we had Marcus Garvey, we had, all the greats who came before, who laid down some blueprints for how to do it. We're still, after how many years since the Ma'afa, we're still talking about the same work that needs to be done. We just gotta, really and truly, we need to do the work. And so on that note, I think I will end it there. I want to thank everyone who was in the chat room. I want to thank all of you who interacted with me from the chat room. I want to thank all of you who, while being quiet, all the same, you were present. I want to thank my family members who were in the chat room as well and hit me up on Facebook with their messages and kind words. And until next time, guys, which next time should be Saturday evening, this has been an episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I will talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.